Look, when Jay signed his contract, the big one was with Beyonce.
Mhm.
When he signed that contract, the marriage contract, he got trophies. Now those fucking trophies, those fucking trophies came rolling in, buddy. He started getting Grammys left and right, man. I mean, look, if you look at his career,
This guy.
Oh, wow. You're gonna let him say that?
Jay was getting Grammys.
You're gonna let him say that?
he had one.
Exactly.
He had
And
one.
he didn't show up.
He had like 20 now.
Oh, Lord.
He had like 18 since he
Stop scrolling. No, seriously, because what you're about to hear in just another rap beef recap. This is about power, silence, and what happens when an untouchable name starts cracking in public. For years, people whispered it. Some laughed it off. Others were too scared to say it out loud. But now, one man is saying it with his chest stand. That man is 50 Cent. Think about it. Why is Jay-Z suddenly so quiet? Where's the billionaire mogul who used to control the room with a single verse or a single move? While headlines explode, lawsuits swirl, and questions stack higher than Grammy trophies, the silence is louder than any diss track. And 50, he sees patterns. He always has. This isn't random. This isn't trolling. This is history repeating itself. Because 50 Cent has already watched one untouchable fall, and once you see the blueprint, you can't unsee it. The industry politics, the gatekeeping, the private deals behind public smiles, the image management when pressure hits. So tonight, we're not asking if something's wrong. We're asking how long this was hidden, and who benefited from the silence. Buckle up, because this story ain't about music anymore. It's about power losing its shield. Everybody thinks this story is about a beef, a rap rivalry, two egos fighting over charts, money, and bragging rights. But that's the surface level version, the one that's easy to digest. What 50 Cent is really pointing at goes way deeper than music. And that's why this conversation refuses to die. Because when someone like 50 keeps circling the same name for over 2 decades, it stops sounding like obsession and starts sounding like a warning. To understand why this tension still exists, you have to go back to the moment when Jay-Z stopped being seen as just a rapper and started being treated like a symbol. The face of success, the blueprint, the guy everyone in hip-hop was told to respect without question. Meanwhile, 50 Cent came in as the opposite energy, loud, reckless, street, unfiltered, a guy who didn't care about industry rules or politeness. From day one, their philosophies clashed. Jay moved quietly, strategically, behind closed doors. 50 moved publicly, aggressively, daring anyone to challenge him. When 50 first poked Jay with how to rob, people laughed it off. A joke record, a stunt. But what a lot of folks missed was that 50 was already testing something back then. He was testing reactions. Who would respond? Who would feel threatened? Jay did respond, and that response did more than people realize. It acknowledged 50 as a real player, but it also planted a seed, a quiet understanding that these two would never truly be on the same side. As 50's career exploded, so did the contrast between them. Jay represented polish, corporate appeal, upward mobility. 50 represented chaos, raw dominance, and uncomfortable truths. When they appeared together publicly, tour, commercials, business moments, it looked like peace. But 50 never saw it that way. To him, it was coexistence, not respect. He kept score, sales numbers, cultural impact, who moved crowds and who moved boardrooms. Then something shifted. As the years went on, Jay's image became more protected, more distant. Fewer interviews, fewer spontaneous moments. Everything felt managed, controlled. Meanwhile, 50 leaned into being unpredictable. Social media gave him a new weapon, and he used it with precision. Jokes that sounded careless, but landed exactly where they were supposed to. Laughs that masked criticism. Silence followed by perfectly timed comments. What 50 keeps suggesting, without ever spelling it out directly, is that Jay's power didn't just come from talent or business sense. It came from positioning, from alliances, from knowing when to step back and let institutions do the work for you. And that kind of power, according to 50, is dangerous when it goes unchecked. Not because it's illegal, but because it reshapes narratives. It decides who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. That's why 50 brings up moments that seem unrelated on the surface: awards, corporate deals, cultural events, who shows up and who doesn't, who gets celebrated as a savior of hip-hop and who gets labeled a problem. He questions why some artists are allowed to reinvent themselves endlessly while others are never forgiven for their past. And every time he asks these questions, people accuse him of hating, of being bitter, of reaching. But 50 doesn't argue back the way most people would. He doesn't say you're wrong. He just laughs and keeps talking. Because in his mind, time eventually proves everything. He watched the industry turn on people it once worshipped. He watched silence become guilt by association. He watched how fast public perception can flip when the narrative changes. So, when controversies start swirling around Jay's name, even if they're unproven, even if they're messy and confusing, 50 doesn't rush to defend him. He doesn't rush to attack him either. He just points out the quiet, the absence, the way the machine suddenly feels cautious. And to 50, that's not coincidence. That's strategy meeting reality. The internet, of course, eats it up. Clips go viral. Quotes get twisted. Memes turn serious conversations into punchlines. But underneath the jokes, there's a real tension people can feel. A sense that the era of unquestioned legends might be ending. That no one is too big to be questioned anymore. And 50 positions himself as the guy willing to ask those questions, even if it makes him look like the villain. What makes this even more uncomfortable is that 50 frames his criticism as protection. He claims that staying silent allows outsiders to paint all of hip-hop with the same brush. That if no one separates the bad behavior from the culture itself, everyone becomes guilty by association. Whether you believe that or not, it's a smart argument. It shifts his role from instigator to whistleblower, from troll to guardian of the culture. And that's where this story really starts to get heavy. Because once you stop looking at this as jokes and beef, and start seeing it as a long-term ideological war about power, image, and accountability, everything 50 says feels more intentional, less random, less emotional, almost patient. Like he's waiting for the moment when people finally ask the same questions he's been asking quietly for years, and realize this was never just about music at all. And that realization is exactly where this video begins. Because once people start asking those questions, the focus shifts from personality to systems. And that's the part most legends never want exposed. In part 2, the conversation moves away from history and straight into the present, where the tension feels less like nostalgia and more like pressure building behind closed doors. What 50 keeps circling back to is silence. Not lyrical silence, not taking a break silence, but strategic silence. The kind that happens when lawyers, publicists, and brand partners start having late-night calls. In today's era, silence isn't neutral, it's calculated, and 50 knows that better than most because he's lived on the other side of it. He's been the loud one when everyone else wanted him quiet. He's been the liability when companies wanted a clean image. So, when he sees someone as powerful as Jay suddenly choosing not to speak, his instincts go off, and then there's the timing. That's what really fuels the speculation. Controversies don't land in a vacuum. They land in moments where public patience is already thin, where people are questioning institutions, power, and who gets protected. 50 doesn't have to say much. He just highlights the contrast. 1 minute, Jay is positioned as the cultural ambassador, the corporate bridge between hip-hop and mainstream America. The next minute, the energy shifts. Appearances feel staged. Moves feel defensive. The confidence feels rehearsed instead of natural. That's when 50 starts doing what he does best. He narrates the moment, not as a reporter, but as someone who's watched the industry long enough to recognize patterns. He brings up how narratives are managed, how scandals don't always disappear, they just get reframed, how timing can be softened by family photos, red carpet appearances, and silence disguised as dignity. He doesn't accuse, he implies, and implication, in the internet age, spreads faster than facts. Public reaction becomes its own storyline. Some fans immediately defend Jay, calling everything a reach, a setup, Another example of a successful black man being targeted. Others feel uneasy, not because they believe everything being said, but because the response feels off, too clean, too controlled. And in between those sides are people who don't know what to believe but can't ignore the tension. That uncertainty is exactly where 50 thrives. Because uncertainty invites conversation, and conversation weakens the illusion of untouchability. Then there's the business angle, which 50 never ignores. He points out how money changes consequences, how influence buys time, how brands don't abandon assets unless they absolutely have to. He reminds people that power doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes, quietly, piece by piece. First it's whispers, then it's distance, then it's selective appearances. And by the time the public realizes something has shifted, the people inside already saw it coming. 50 also flips the spotlight back on himself. Intentionally, he dares people to dig, to look for scandals in his past, to find the skeletons everyone assumes must exist. He says it with confidence, almost arrogance, because that confidence is part of the message. He's saying, look, if there was something there, it would have surfaced by now. In an era where everyone is exposed eventually, longevity without collapse becomes its own argument. That's why his comments hit harder than they should. He's not positioned as a saint. He's positioned as a survivor, someone who's made it through the industry without becoming dependent on its protection. And that gives him freedom. Freedom to talk, freedom to joke, freedom to question people who usually don't get questioned. The more he talks, the more uncomfortable the contrast becomes. Jay's polished silence versus 50's messy openness. One feels safe, the other feels honest, and audiences are drawn to honesty, even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. That's why clips get shared. That's why comments explode. That's why people who don't even like 50 still listen when he speaks. What really unsettles people, though, is the implication that this isn't personal anymore. It's philosophical. 50 isn't saying one man is bad and the other is good. He's asking who decides morality in an industry driven by money and image. Who gets redemption arcs and who gets erased. Who is allowed to evolve and who is frozen in their past forever. And once that question is out there, it doesn't just apply to Jay. It applies to everyone at the top. Which is why the reaction feels so tense. Because challenging one symbol threatens the entire structure. And 50 knows that. He's not swinging randomly. He's tapping the glass, watching to see where it cracks first. By the time part 2 ends, the story no longer feels like gossip. It feels like a slow-motion collision. Two philosophies moving toward each other. One built on silence and control, the other built on noise and exposure. And as the pressure keeps building, it becomes clear that the real fallout isn't about who's right or wrong, but about what happens when the audience stops accepting legends at face value and starts demanding answers. Which is exactly where part 3 takes over. And when the audience starts demanding answers, the entire dynamic shifts. Because legends aren't built to respond to pressure, they're built to float above it. That's what makes part 3 feel less like a continuation and more like a breaking point. This is where the whispers turn into consequences, at least in the court of public opinion, which in today's world can be more ruthless than any courtroom. What 50 keeps hammering home is the idea that power doesn't vanish, it relocates. When pressure gets too loud in one space, it moves behind walls. Closed meetings, private calls, damage control disguised as strategy. He hints that what people see publicly is always the last step, never the first. By the time fans notice a shift in tone or presence, the real conversations have already happened somewhere far from microphones and cameras. Speculation starts filling the gaps. Bloggers talk about internal investigations that may or may not exist. Anonymous insiders claim brands are nervous, not because of proof, but because of perception. And perception is everything. 50 doesn't confirm any of it. He doesn't need to. He just lets the noise grow, occasionally tossing in a sarcastic comment that keeps the fire lit, a laugh here, a repost there, just enough to remind people he's watching. public backlash becomes fragmented. Some fans double down, defending Jay harder than ever, treating criticism like a personal attack. Others start distancing themselves, not out of belief, but out of caution. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of history if the narrative shifts. That hesitation alone speaks volumes. Silence spreads, neutral statements become the norm, and suddenly, the room doesn't feel as full as it used to. .50 frames this moment as inevitable. He suggests that every era reaches a point where the icons of that time have to face the same scrutiny they once escaped, not because they failed, but because the world changed. What was once overlooked is now magnified. What was once managed quietly now leaks instantly, and no amount of legacy can fully shield someone from that shift. He also points out the irony. Hip-hop was built on calling out power, exposing hypocrisy, speaking truth regardless of consequence. Somewhere along the way, some figures became the very thing the culture was designed to challenge, untouchable, protected, above criticism. And to 50, that's the real betrayal. Not any single allegation or rumor, but the idea that questioning a powerful figure is treated as disrespect instead of responsibility. The consequences he hints at aren't just legal or financial. They're cultural. Loss of mystique, loss of trust, loss of that invisible shield that keeps questions from sticking. Once that shield cracks, even slightly, everything feels different. Every move gets analyzed. Every silence gets interpreted, every smile gets questioned, and rebuilding that level of unquestioned admiration is nearly impossible. 50 positions himself outside of all that. He claims he has nothing to lose by talking because he never relied on approval in the first place. Love him or hate him, people know where he stands. That consistency becomes his credibility. And in contrast, carefully managed images start to feel fragile, like they can shatter if the spotlight stays on too long. By the end of this narrative, the message isn't about wishing harm or celebrating downfall. It's about accountability catching up with everyone eventually. 50's tone stays sarcastic, but the underlying point is serious. No one stays untouchable forever. No one gets to rewrite the rules indefinitely. And when the culture decides it wants answers, silence stops being powerful and starts being suspicious. That's what leaves the audience uneasy. Not certainty, but possibility. The feeling that something is shifting, even if no one can fully explain what yet. And 50 thrives in that space. He doesn't close the case. He leaves it open. He invites people to watch closely, to question more, to stop accepting polished narratives without looking underneath. As the story fades out, what lingers in a verdict, but a challenge. If hip-hop is truly about truth, then no one should be immune from scrutiny. Not legends, not moguls, not symbols of success. And whether you see 50 as a troll, a strategist, or an instigator, one thing is clear. He's forcing a conversation that a lot of people would rather avoid. And once that conversation starts, it doesn't matter who tried to stay quiet. The culture decides who survives the spotlight, and who does and single quotes t. And now it's on you. Because stories like this don't live or die based on what insiders say behind closed doors. They live in public conversation. They survive through questions, reactions, and the willingness to look past polished headlines. So ask yourself, is this just another loud personality stirring the pot for attention? Or is this what it looks like when someone refuses to let power hide behind silence? Is 50 exposing something real? Or is he holding up a mirror the culture ain't ready to look into yet? Drop your thoughts below, because this debate doesn't end when the video does. Who do you believe has more to lose here? The one staying quiet or the one speaking recklessly? Do legends deserve protection? Or do they deserve the same scrutiny as everyone else? And if hip-hop was built on truth, who decides when that truth becomes inconvenient? If you felt that tension, if something about this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. Hit like if you think no one should be untouchable. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns that question the narratives you're told to accept. And comment, because the real investigation doesn't happen in studios or boardrooms. It happens right here in the conversation you help create. Right here in the conversation you help create.